Hi, I'm Jason Bayless. Sorry I can't be with you today, but thank you for allowing me to record this video for you. So far, you've been exploring how to channel challenging emotions such as anger, despair, and anxiety into meaningful action. But let's take a moment to take a step back and ask the question, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where we feel so stuck and caught in these emotions? Today, I want to present a framework that effectively illustrates the underlying and often invisible process that guide us here. That framework is the Cycle of Socialization by Bobby Harrow. It is important to note that this is not the framework. It is one of many. I just like it because it lays out the examination of how we got here in a way that not only provides a clear understanding of how societies instill and reinforce inequalities, and it also provides a way out of these mechanisms into the cycle of liberation. Sadly, we won't have time in this presentation to explore the cycle of liberation, but if you're interested, you can download the booklet, Liberation, Principles and Practices for Social Transformation at radicalguide.com for free. So what is socialization? Let's define it before jumping into the framework. Socialization is a lifelong process where we learn and internalize the norms, values, and practices of our society. This process integrates us into the cultural and institutional systems that shape how we see the world and our place within it, often happening without our conscious awareness. As we are socialized, we adopt roles, identities, and beliefs that contribute to maintaining the power structures and inequality present in our society. Okay, now let's talk about the cycle of socialization. As you can see here, it is represented as a cycle, as a circle, and it moves clockwise in terms of this graph. And before we get into the details, I just want to highlight the main components of the cycle of socialization, just so you'll know, because we're going to zoom into it. So I want you to kind of look at this to know the placement for this. So here, and I'll mark it by arrows as we go through, is the beginning. And then it moves into the first socialization. Then it moves into the institutional and cultural socialization. Then it moves into enforcement. Then it moves into results. And then it moves into the direction for change. And there's two options here and the direction for change, but they both require action. And then in the center, the glue that kind of holds this together, the cycle of socialization together, is the core. So without going into details, I just want to let you know how it flows. That's how we're going to talk about it. I'm going to zoom in on each of these sections. So keep in mind where we are in the process, so that helps you show how we grow. So let's move into the beginning of the cycle. Okay, so now we're at the beginning. As you can see in the first circle, the beginning is just born into the world with mechanics already in place, no blame, no consciousness, no guilt, no choice. There's limited information about the world or no information, and there might be misinformation around like biases, stereotype, prejudice, history, habit, and tradition. So as we mentioned earlier, this cycle begins before birth, where socialization is influenced by pre-existing systems and structures, where individuals are born into the world where societal norms, values, biases are already in place. So like, for example, it's like, well, if you're born in this world, how are you born into existing norms, values, and biases that are already in place? So like in the hospital, let's look at, a baby being in the hospital. A baby born in the hospital might be wrapped in a blue or pink blanket based on their assigned gender at birth. This reflecting the deeply rooted gender norms of the society or culture. These norms are part of the patriarchal system that assigns roles and expectations to individuals before they can express or define their own identity. Now we're going to move on to the first socialization. This usually happens early in life, where children are socialized by their immediate environment and by their family, teachers, and people they love and trust. They are unconsciously absorbing biases and expectation. The first socialization stage teaches children the way things are by shaping their understanding of their own identity and the identities of others. Like, for example, a young boy hears his parents comment that boys don't cry when he shows sadness. This teaches him that being emotionally vulnerable is not acceptable for his gender, reinforcing traditional masculinity norms. Meanwhile, a girl in the same family might be encouraged to help with chores more than her brother, enforcing gender roles. So all of these practices, these socializations are normally happen subconsciously. It's just like these are the practices, these are the way things are. Another example would be like when a child is riding in the car with their family, and when they drive by certain people or groups of people or certain neighborhoods, the family rolls up the windows or locks the doors. One time might not socialize a child, but multiple times, every time this happens, the child can then look out the window and start associating danger or concern or fear with the images that the child sees outside the window, whether it's a neighborhood, whether it's specific people. It starts socializing this person, this child, and to thinking that there's something wrong with what they're seeing because their parents are afraid. Now that we've been socialized by friends and family, it's time to go out in the world and look at institutional and cultural socialization. When we talk about institutions, we mean kind of like schools, the media, and religion. They all reinforce societal messages and norms learned early in life in that first socialization. Now, as individuals grow, institutional influences and cultural norms reinforces the lessons learned in that first socialization. These systems perpetuate dominant ideologies and maintain power structures that often through implicit message about who holds value and who does not. For example, in school, history books might highlight European colonial explorers as heroic figures while glossing over the violence of colonization. Media might further this narrative by celebrating national holidays like Columbus Day, which reinforces Eurocentric perspective that marginalizes indigenous histories and struggles. So before jumping into the next section of the cycle of socialization, let's do a quick review. So we're born into a world where the mechanisms are already in place. And then the second stage is our first socialization, where we are socialized and taught the way things are by our parents, people we love, people close to us, immediate family. We're learning our values, we're learning our identity and how to identify others. And then as we get older and enter into the world outside of our immediate family, we're influenced and socialized by institutions and cultural norms. So that leads us to enforcement. And what we know about enforcement is that society rewards conformity and punishes deviation. This practice reinforces dominant norms. Those who conform are rewarded, their acceptance, they're given opportunities, while those who challenge or deviate from the norms face penalties. They're either ostracized or discriminated against. These enforcements ensure compliance with the dominant culture and discourages any resistance or deviation from that. So like, for example, a teenager might face being bullied or face social exclusion for wearing clothes associated with another gender, while peers who conform to traditional gender norms are celebrated and accepted. What we see like in the workplace, a woman who asserts herself might be labeled as bossy, while a man showing the same behavior is seen as a natural leader. So, how does these enforcements function? Enforcement occurs through a combination of explicit, through laws, policies, etc., and implicit expectations, which are cultural norms and social pressures. It often operates on several different levels. So, the levels are social enforcement, institutional enforcement, cultural enforcement, and internalized enforcements. So for the social enforcement, going back to the example of a teenager who questions traditional gender roles might be teased or excluded from peers, which that act reinforces conformity to a heteronormative expectations. Institutional enforcements, example is like in a workplace, you might penalize employees for discussing wages or protecting wage disparities and reinforcing economic inequality. An example of cultural enforcement would be like movies or advertisements that portray men as strong and as assertive and women as nurturing and submissive. And this act creates cultural expectations that punish those who challenge, those rules. And then finally, the final level is the internalized enforcement. An example of this would be a person from a marginalized group may downplay their own identity or avoid associating or advocating their rights, fear of backlash or exclusion. So enforcement is these levels of enforcement are a strong way that we maintain the dominant narrative in our culture. So these different levels of enforcement leads us to the next section, which is the result. And what is the result for these domains of socialization and the enforcement of the dominant narrative in the socialization? The result is that all of this combined upholds a systemic inequality and oppression that becomes normalized, often making these systems invisible to those who benefit from them. So what does that mean? That's normally what we think of when we think of privilege. It's like we're so socialized, it's so normalized, these systems of inequality and oppression are so normalized that we are not able to even see ourselves and how we benefit from these dominant norms. And so, like, for example, in a workplace, may remain predominantly male at the leadership level because hiring practices favor those who have historically held power, often under the guise of selecting qualified candidates. Meanwhile, women and people of color may not even have the same opportunities to gain these qualifications due to the systemic barriers. So this normalization, the result of these normalization of the socialization, as you can see in the chart here, is like it starts to generate anger and dehumanization and guilt and self-hatred and stress and lack of reality. It has a negative impact on all of us. So what is there to do? The good news is there's options, and that takes us to the final element of the cycle of socialization, and that's direction for change. So as you can see in this section, it revolves around action, and the choice that you're given in this section is what type of action are you going to take. On one hand, the action that you have is to do nothing. Don't make waves. Promote and protect the status quo. And if you take that path, you're fed back into the cycle. You're continuously enforcing and reinforcing the cycle of socialization. But the other choice that you have at this is to break the cycle. And you can break the cycle. But breaking the cycle requires the awareness, the education, and action to challenge oppressive systems and norms. And that's not easy. As we've seen in this whole cycle, it's just built upon one another and continuously reinforcing, and results in, you know, these negative feelings, these anxieties, these things that we don't, these emotions that we don't know what to do about. So there is a possibility of breaking a cycle, but it requires more than just being aware. It requires action. It involves understanding one place in the cycle, recognizing your own complicity, and acting to disrupt it. Because when we do that, we have a way off of this cycle and creating something new, creating something that actually empowers us, that it gives us strength, that we don't feel stuck. So those emotions that we talk about in this course, and turning disparity, turning anxiety, turning disempowerment into creative collective action, is now possible because we are now more aware of the systems and structures that put us here, that created us, whether it's intentional or not. There is a system that's reinforcing itself. And we feel these emotions because we get trapped into that. And I want to go back to the cycle and go to the center, the core, and explore that, because I want to talk about the glue that holds the cycle together. So now that we're looking at the core, I want us to kind of reflect about all the conversations that you've had about, transforming anger, despair, into action. I want you to look at this core while we talk about this. Is like I said, fear, ignorance, confusion, insecurity. It all holds this cycle together. But the good news is around this is that they also can be the entry points for transformation. Recognizing and addressing these emotions can shift the behavior and inspire collective action. For example, if we're looking at fear, we can use fear as a motivator for courage. Fear of injustice can propel you to act rather than remain passive. We can transform ignorance into curiosity. Use it as a starting point for education and dialogue. We can embrace confusion as a sign of a critical engagement with complex systems. And we can work to untangle these complexities. We can use insecurity to build solidarity, acknowledge vulnerabilities, and connect with others working towards shared liberation. Acknowledge your emotions' presence. Acknowledge the presence of the cycle. Reflect on how fear, ignorance, confusion, and insecurity show up in your life or in the lives of those who are around you. And ask yourself, what fears prevent me from challenging oppressive systems? What don't I know about the experiences of others, and why don't I know those? What confuses me about power, privilege, and oppression? How do insecurities about my own identity or belief influence my actions? Another way of saying that is like, how am I reinforcing the dominant norms that I'm not aware of? Naming these feelings is a first step to breaking the cycle. And once you've named them, educate yourself and others about it. Ignorance and confusion thrives in the absence of knowledge. So engage in continuous learning about systemic oppression, intersectionality, and the lived experiences of marginalized groups, and don't forget yourself. Don't forget to learn about how you're showing up in this cycle. And then once you've learned, share with others of what you've learned to disrupt the ignorance collectively. Create that ripple effect. Also, challenge fear. Fear is deeply rooted in perceived threats of loss of status, safety, or belonging. And we can challenge that by developing resilience, by building supportive communities that align with liberation or align with the world that we want to see, that we want to create. We can also reframe fear as an opportunity for growth. For example, stepping out of our comfort zone to confront biases, our own biases and biases of others, or to engage in activism can feel really intimidating, but it can lead to meaningful change. You can take those emotions and those feelings that we're having and turn it into meaningful change. And then what about insecurity? I know it seems so big. If we have all the system that's reinforcing itself, that we're not even aware of all the details, that's got to make us feel insecure. But being insecure about one's knowledge or role can prevent action. So let's acknowledge that no one is perfect and accept that mistakes will happen and be a part of the learning process. This grounding, this understanding, this being comfortable with addressing and seeing and acknowledging these feelings and insecurities can help us move past feeling paralyzed and move us into meaningful action. And when we say meaningful action, that's the final stage. That's where we break away from the cycle of socialization. That is the choice that we can make. That is the action that we need to choose to make to break away from that cycle of socialization and create something new. So I hope all of this was helpful and beneficial. Hope it gives you a new insight, a new way of relating to the world around you. And hopefully it will move you further down your path. And so thank you for allowing me to record this and be with you during this call. I appreciate it. Thank you.